5,000 men worked around the clock in a desert canyon with no roads, no power, and no water, through tunnel heat that cooked men at their posts, hanging from ropes above a void, through the worst years of the Great Depression. What they poured is still not finished doing what concrete does. And the number this story opened with, 112, may be the biggest lie on the site. This is the concrete monster. Before the dam, the Colorado River was the monster. Every spring, mountain snowmelt turned it into a flood that ripped farms off the map. And in 1905 it escaped completely, jumped its banks, and poured into a desert basin for 2 years straight, accidentally creating an entire inland sea. Levees failed, channels failed, farmers rebuilt, and the river tore out the repairs the following spring. A cycle of ruin as dependable as the snowmelt that drove it. The Southwest lived at the mercy of a river with moods. So the engineers proposed something nobody had ever done to a river this size: stop it entirely. The plan put the dam in Boulder Canyon, until the drills came back with fractured, unstable rock. So they moved it 20 miles downstream to Black Canyon. Deeper, narrower, solid volcanic bedrock, and almost impossible to reach. No roads, no power lines, no drinkable water for 30 miles. The first workers came anyway in 1931 because it was the Great Depression and this was the only sure job in America. They slept in a squatter camp called Ragtown, where the heat inside a canvas tent could kill, and dysentery from bad water took lives in the night. The government finally bulldozed Ragtown and built Boulder City in its place. A company town, sober and policed, where 5,000 men could sleep in real beds, eat in a mess hall that fed the whole army twice a day, and cash a paycheck that meant something in 1931. Dam work paid better than almost anything a man could find, in a year when most men could find nothing. But a bed only helps you survive the night. The furnace was waiting inside the canyon. The first problem was brutally simple. You cannot build a dam in a river that is still flowing. The Colorado had to be moved. The answer was 4 diversion tunnels, 2 on each side, bored straight through the canyon walls. Each one 56 feet across, lined with 3 feet of concrete, running nearly 3/4 of a mile through the mountain. The crews attacked the rock with a machine built for this job, the drilling jumbo, a truck with a whole wall of pneumatic drills bolted to its bed, backed against the tunnel face so dozens of holes could be bored at once. Pack the holes with dynamite. Pull the truck out. Fire the round. Haul the rock. The cycle ran day and night. About 20 feet of new tunnel per day, in air thick with carbon monoxide from the trucks hauling rock, in summer heat that dropped men where they stood. 18 months later, the tunnels opened, temporary coffer dams sealed the channel, and the entire Colorado River turned obediently into the mountain. For the first time in millions of years, the riverbed at Black Canyon was dry. With the riverbed exposed, the canyon walls had to be stripped of every loose rock. Any stone that could fall on the dam during construction or shake loose decades later had to come off by hand. The men who did it were called high scalers. They went over the rim on ropes, hundreds of feet above the canyon floor, carrying jackhammers, crowbars, and dynamite, sitting on wooden planks slung from a single cable. They invented their own safety gear, cloth caps dipped in boiling tar and hardened into helmets. The hard-boiled hat, ancestor of every hard hat on Earth. They looked ridiculous. They saved skulls. In 1931, an engineer named Burl Rutledge slipped over the edge and fell, and a high scaler named Oliver Cowan kicked off the wall, swung out into open air, and caught him, pinning him against the rock until a second scaler got a line on them both. That was the caliber of man the job required. The high scalers earned the best wages on the site. They also died at the highest rate, and they knew it. Ask the Bureau of Reclamation how many men died here, and you get a strangely exact answer: 96. That is the on-site count, and it starts only when the main contract started. Add the men who died surveying and preparing the site, men like J.G. Tierney, and you reach the 112 this story opened with. But dig through the records, and both numbers begin to look generous. The tunnels ran 140 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, and the truck exhaust built into lethal doses of carbon monoxide. The men called it tunnel sickness, confusion, memory loss, collapse. Workers poisoned underground died weeks or months later, at home or in the hospital, and the company doctors wrote down pneumonia. Pneumonia was nobody's liability. Heatstroke deaths off-site were not counted either. Historians going back through the files believe dozens of deaths were filed away under that one convenient word. There is no plaque for those men. The memorial at the dam honors the counted, the ones the paperwork admitted to, and the rules for who qualified were written by the same company that paid the claims. The ledger of the Hoover Dam is precise to the man, and almost no one who worked there believed it. Now the monster itself. The dam needed 3.25 million cubic yards of concrete, more than any single structure ever attempted. And concrete has a secret. As it cures, it makes heat. A chemical reaction inside the cement burns for years, and in a mass this size, the middle would have taken 125 years to cool on its own. Poured as one block, the Hoover Dam would have cracked itself apart before it ever held back a drop of water. The solution still reads like science fiction. Pour the dam as hundreds of interlocking columns, up to 60 feet square, rising 5 feet at a time. And through every column, thread pipe, 582 miles of 1-inch steel pipe. Then pump cold river water through the dam's own body, around the clock, for nearly 2 years, until the last pour was cooled in 1935. To chill that water, the site ran its own refrigeration plant, a machine that could have turned out 1,000 tons of ice a day, aimed instead at the inside of a dam. And when each block finally reached its target temperature, the crews pumped the cooling pipes full of cement grout and sealed them inside. 582 miles of plumbing, entombed forever in the structure it saved. They did not just build a dam. They built a machine that refrigerated itself into existence. A dam does not simply block water. Water pushes, and the deeper you go, the harder it pushes, until at the base of this dam it presses with over 45,000 pounds on every square foot. A plain gravity dam answers that force with nothing but its own weight, a wall leaning into the flood. The Hoover Dam does something smarter. It curves upstream. That curve turns the river's push into a squeeze. The force flows along the arch, sideways, into the canyon walls themselves. Try it with your own hands. Hold them flat against a push, and you get shoved backward. Cup them into an arch, and the push compresses your fingers together. The load travels around the curve and into your arms. That is what Black Canyon does for the Hoover Dam. The canyon is not scenery. It is the other half of the structure, taking the rivers, shove the way two braced shoulders take a door. The water's own pressure squeezes the concrete tighter, and compression is the one force concrete loves. The result stands 726 feet tall, 660 feet thick at the base, and just 45 feet wide at the crest. Physics, not brute mass, holds back the river. Running all of it was Frank Crowe, general superintendent, hired because he had built more big dams than any man alive, and driven like few men in American history. His masterpiece was the delivery system. 6 steel cableways strung high across the gorge, swinging 20-ton buckets of concrete down to the poor crews around the clock, guided by hand signals and whistle blasts, plus a heavy lift line rated at 150 tons for machinery. Crowe stood on the rim 16 hours a day, watching every bucket swing. When workers struck in 1931 over the heat and the pay, He refused to negotiate, fired every man who walked, and had the site running again within days. The men called him Hurry Up Crowe, a nickname earned over a career of big dams, and never harder than here. The consortium behind him, 6 companies, had bid $49 million on a federal project appropriated at $165 million. They finished early and under budget in the depths of the Great Depression. For a few years in the 1930s, this canyon held the only thing in America that was not collapsing. The first concrete went in on June 6, 1933. From that moment until the last bucket on May 29, 1935, the site never stopped. 2 mixing plants on the rim fed the cableways. The cableways fed the forms. A fresh 8 cubic yard bucket swung down roughly every 78 seconds, day and night, while crews spread each load with shovels and pneumatic vibrators, and the cooling pipes were threaded through every new lift. The bucket work had its own etiquette of survival. 20 tons on a mile of steel rope does not stop for the man beneath it. So the poor crews learned to read the shadows sliding across the forms, because the shadow always arrived before the bucket did. It was a single, continuous, 2-year-long pour. When it ended, the dam stood taller than the Washington Monument and heavier than the Great Pyramid of Giza, enough concrete for a 2-lane highway from New York to San Francisco. 3.25 million cubic yards, placed 1 bucket at a time. Behind the finished dam, the Colorado began to rise. 6 years later, Lake Mead stretched 112 miles upstream and held 9 trillion gallons, the largest reservoir in the United States. 17 turbines in the powerhouse, first commissioned in 1936, sent over 2,000 megawatts to Nevada, Arizona, and Southern California. The electricity lit Las Vegas and powered the Los Angeles factories that armed the Second World War. For years, it was the largest hydroelectric plant on Earth, the blueprint every later giant studied. The lake still supplies drinking water to 25 million people. And the deepest change was invisible. The flood cycle that had terrorized the Southwest for millennia simply stopped. But there is a darker trade in the ledger. Before the dam, the Colorado emptied into the Gulf of California through a vast green delta. Today, the river rarely reaches the sea at all, consumed on the way by farms, by cities, by everyone it made possible. And the price of all of it, 96 men, or the truer, uncounted number, sits somewhere beneath 726 feet of concrete. The Hoover Dam was built for a climate that no longer exists. Since the year 2000, the Colorado River Basin has been living through its driest stretch in more than 1,000 years. Lake Mead has fallen over 150 feet, leaving a white bathtub ring of exposed rock around the whole shoreline. Every year the ring grows taller, a bathtub draining in slow motion, measured in decades. If the lake keeps dropping, the turbines lose their water. Below that waits dead pool, the level where the river can no longer flow through the dam at all. The largest concrete structure of its era, built to end the Colorado's violence forever, now depends on a river the engineers of the 1930s assumed would never change. The concrete is still cooling. The turbines are still spinning. The dam will outlast every one of us. The question is whether the water will. This is Atlas Engineered.